Greetings, Raise community. Brent coming in live with today's guest, Becky Fullmer, who serves as Associate Vice President for Advancement Operations at the University of Central Florida. Greetings, Becky.
Hi, it is so good to be with you, Brent, and thank you for having me.
Well, I was commenting, this has been a spurt of coincidental, although pre-scheduled Big 12 Development Conference podcast episode follow-ups. I've connected with Greg Willems recently, your former colleague Steve Rosfeld, who's now at the University of Cincinnati. Great to see you again, but it does line up well that we were just in person last week in Lawrence, Kansas. So that being said, we've covered a lot of ground over the years and even last week, but not the ground that we're about to cover, because I've never said something like, hey, Becky, I want to know more about your college journey. Tell me about Becky, junior year of high school. Who was she? What was she into? And what led her to the Ohio State University?
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I haven't thought about this in a long time. And first, before I dive into that, I'll say, what a great conference that Big 12 Development Conference was. The energy of that group at Lawrence, Kansas was phenomenal. The University of Kansas, what a wonderful host. So that was just an amazing experience all around. But who I was as a junior in high school, gosh, I would say idealistic, passionate about changing the world, did not have any idea really what I wanted to do with my life. And so I'd say, in high school, I toyed around with the idea of a marine biologist, but I lived in Ohio. So that was a bit of a stretch for me to be thinking about. Then I was into physical therapy, and ultimately I entered college with an elementary education major because that's what my mom did. And so that's kind of the default in my family. But very quickly in getting into college, I changed course just a little bit. Realized that I did not want to be an elementary school teacher, though I have so much respect for those who are. And I changed my major to English. And so that was my undergraduate degree was in English. I went to Ohio State sort of by default also, just because it was where a lot of members of my family went. But I love that university. It was such a transformational experience for me, and particularly the relationships with the faculty that I had there, and just what a wonderful kind of learning culture, very formative experience for me. And I bleed scarlet and gray, although now also black and gold.
I'm surprised to hear you say faculty relationships, because you would just think Ohio State, it's a lot of things, but small and intimate isn't one of them. So why were you able to do that?
Great question. So I actually started out at one of Ohio State's regional campuses. And the benefit to that was you got kind of the Ohio State experience, but a small dose of it with much smaller classes. So as a freshman in college, I was in classes with fully tenured professors, small class sizes, and really, I think, got some wonderful experiences learning from that level of faculty. And then eventually I transferred to the Columbus campus and graduated from there, but I was already, well into my major. So it was a different kind of journey for me. But the regional campus that I attended was in Lima, Ohio, and can't say enough great things about it.
Love that. Makes more sense. And so you're studying English and at the same time starting to think about a career path. And luckily, English is used in lots of careers, but doesn't necessarily point you in a specific direction. So how'd you narrow it down?
So my career path has involved a few different things. And so my first job out of college was at Ohio State because it was familiar. And I'll just say I was an editorial assistant for the Encyclopedia of the Midwest, which sounds riveting, I am sure. But it was quite fun. I got to work with, a number of really kind of eminent scholars and leaders. There were a couple of faculty members from Ohio State, and then one from Miami University in Oxford that were part of that project. We worked with scholars and researchers kind of all over the world in developing content for that encyclopedia. So that was fun. And then after that,
Well, Becky, I mean, I've got to ask, as a Midwesterner, I mean, what's just one or two fun fact that maybe you can dust off for us, that people who haven't spent time in the Midwest, that haven't read or written an encyclopedia about it, might be interested in?
oh my gosh. Man,
Anything stand out? No worries if not. Just
no, not anything in particular. And I wish I could answer this question because there are certainly some gems. I just can't think of them right now. But I do think, that was an experience that made me see.
I mean,
where I grew up
I
in
could
three
even say,
different
like,
lives.
did you define what the Midwest is? Because there's a lot of,
Yes.
hot takes about what is the Midwest even, what states make the cut, which ones don't. I don't know.
We did. And I remember thinking, gosh, Brent, man, if only I had brushed up on my
Oh,
encyclopedia
good.
history before this. So
Just give me a state that isn't really in the Midwest, but kind of thinks they are, or vice
I
versa.
feel like Kentucky is a little bit on the edge. And honestly, I can't remember if we had that in or had it out. I think we had it out of the Midwest. But I want to say Pennsylvania is also one. We're not sure. Like a little bit of Pennsylvania might be in the Midwest, maybe not all of it. So I think those border states, they were all like right on the cusp.
Love it. I think I'm, pro Pennsylvania Midwest, anti-Kentucky. So that lines
Yeah.
up. Who knows? But Pennsylvania is a big state. Is Philly Midwest? No, absolutely
No.
not. You're
No,
right.
East Coast.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, so you do that, and then ultimately, my understanding is you get exposure to the world of impact and philanthropy, and it sounds like in a pretty amazing context that had to be pretty emotional, just given the focus area.
Yeah, that was a really my work there was a little bit more editorial in nature, but I did get some exposure to grant writing. And I would say one of the things that job did for me was really kind of cement that how I spend my time and how I focus my efforts and energy professionally. Really, it's important, the impact of what that means. And so after that.
What was the organization? What was the mission? What stood out about your time there?
So it was a project that was sponsored by Ohio State. And so it still felt like, to me, a really important contribution to knowledge and understanding about what the Midwest was in that particular scenario. But I think it was my career step after that was probably it was very, very different and emotional on a much different level than my work there. And so once the encyclopedia project ended, and again, that was such a wonderful experience, and I worked with terrific people. I had an opportunity to kind of rethink and about what I wanted to do, and ended up taking a position at a small organization very close to where I grew up that was in the child welfare area. And so they provided residential treatment and foster care and adoption to kids who had emotional and behavioral issues. And that was just an eye-opening experience. I was in kind of my late 20s at that point, and worked with teenagers that had come from such a different, just a completely different place than what I had come from, and the amount of I think just turmoil and transition and kind of absolute lack of safety that they had experienced in their life to be then on a part of their journey. We dealt mostly with kids who were older teenagers at that point, so we had lots who were kind of aging out of the system at that point, and trying to support them through all of that. It was just a really again, eye-opening and kind of heartrending experience to be a part of that. And that for me was something that really cemented for me the importance and the power of education to transform lives. As I thought about those kids who were aging out of the system and going out into a world where they didn't really have a home or a community that had necessarily consistently invested in their education and provided, good solid learning experiences for them. And so they were going out into the world without that kind of support network or anything like that. That was really difficult to think about. And so, it just reinforced my passion for education, higher education for sure, but also, how do we grow young adults into and starting when they're children into productive members of society. And while the last several years, I haven't necessarily been as involved in that world, that is definitely something that I think a lot about going back to at some point, particularly even as a special advocate for those kids. As my own kids get a little bit older and out of the house, I'll have a little bit more time to devote to that. But that population of youth that are growing up in the foster care and child welfare system and aging out, that's a really special population of kids.
I love it. Thank you for sharing. And, I won't dive deeper into the stories, although I can imagine how kind of emotional and challenging that might have been. And then ultimately, it sounds like that was part of what both exposed you to the importance of philanthropy, reinvigorated your passion and interest in education, and then you had the opportunity to join, for sure, one of the real, I think, powerhouses of the advancement world, which is Ohio State University. And so I'd love to know more about just joining the organization. You've got some professional perspective. It's coming home to Ohio State in a certain regard, but it's very different to be, a full-time staff member in the advancement shop versus a student on campus. So what do you learn? What were some of the initial impressions that you had on the inside?
Yeah. So what a great question. And I'll say I did get my start in philanthropy with that small organization. I was actually a frontline fundraiser for a little bit of time there before making the move to Ohio State. And one of the most shocking things to go back to Ohio State from a small nonprofit organization was in the small organization, you wear a lot of different hats and you do a lot of different things, and sometimes feel spread a little bit thin. Go to a place like Ohio State, and there's somebody to do every bit of that, right? So I would go in with the mentality of like, oh, I could do this, or I could do this, or I could try this, and like, no, that's somebody else's job. No, that's somebody else's job. And it took a little bit of time to kind of wrap my head around that and to be able to work into a system like that. But ultimately, I really like that because it gives you an opportunity to really kind of go deep in a particular domain, a particular area, and develop some expertise, I think, in a way that you can't necessarily do when you're trying to cover all of the things in a small organization. So Ohio State is, again, just love that place so much. And what made it so special, I think, was the people. Definitely a very different experience working there than being a student there. But something that permeates Ohio State, I think, at all levels is just this great sense of institutional affinity. Like you love that place, and you're really convinced and committed to the change that it's making in the world, right? And there's just, I think about it a lot as there's just this expectation of excellence at Ohio State. It's woven into everything that they do there, and I just really like that. To be a part of the culture and a team like that was really impactful.
Two of my closest friends that I got to know in college at Brown both grew up in Ohio, one in Akron, one in outside of Columbus in a town called Grove City. And I lived with them right out of college in Chicago. A lot of Ohio State affinity, certainly in Chicago. And it was really the first time that I got exposed to the whole, OH
I know
thing. And it was so annoying, but also really impressive at the same time. And there just are only a few institutions. Auburn has War Eagle. I mean, there's a couple more out there, but where it's like at that level of you're walking through the airport, you're walking down the street, you're on a bus, it doesn't matter. People are just yelling at each other. At the same time, most of those people are not giving this fiscal year. And it's just an amazing mix of deep affinity that doesn't always convert to philanthropy, which I'm sure you spent a ton of time thinking about. But how do y'all get your arms around that when you were at Ohio State?
Gosh, you have some really, really great questions. So, I think one of the things that was really starting to change and transform at Ohio State during my time there, and I'll say, working with Mike Eicher there at such a transformational leader, and even from several layers down in the organization, just really learned a lot from watching kind of how he was able to kind of come in and build a culture and create a culture that was still felt very much like Ohio State, but was at the same time different. So I think that they're challenged to think about, just because somebody isn't giving right now doesn't mean that they won't be giving in the future. And how do we start to build that affinity and leverage that sense of connection and identity with Ohio State into a relationship that may down the road, turn into a philanthropic relationship. But there are lots of other ways that people can express that affinity and that point of engagement. And how do we capture that, cultivate that, towards that end down the road? But, start early and not make that necessarily, this is me talking, not necessarily the explicit first thing that we need somebody to do when they're connecting with an organization.
And you were, focused in the prospect management realm, which is not necessarily trying to get, my buddies to lob in $100 because they like yelling OHIO out at people they don't know. But when you think about translating that or unlocking philanthropy around the upper middle of the pyramid, newly assigned prospects, I would imagine that there's some level of confidence when you work at Ohio State, knowing that most people love this place and they're not afraid to shout about it with strangers. But that doesn't mean you're not going to get the hard no, the pass, the challenge of getting your foot in the door to really have a philanthropic conversation. But what was your read on that? Did it feel like there was a bit of an unfair advantage and you really just needed the blocking and tackling to go, tap into that affinity? Or was it a harder sell given maybe less of a culture of, I don't know, major gift fundraising for a public institution?
I think that the same themes probably apply in every university that I've worked in. So Ohio State and then the University of Cincinnati for about 5 years, and now at UCF, all slightly different flavors because they're institutions at different places. But the same underlying things kind of exist there, where you have a number of people who haven't heard from the institution in 30 years, and then all of a sudden, getting asked to have coffee with somebody or something like that. You have a lot of different messages kind of going out to people all over the place. And so how do you try to capture that with consistent storytelling and a consistent kind of brand experience? And then you also had, I think it was true, kind of tying back to the people who had gone for a very long time without hearing from the university. You have to really be intentional about setting a strategy to engage people outside of your back door. So many of the alumni live in Columbus and or in the state of Ohio. Once you get out of those boundaries, what are you talking about? And so I think, I know Ohio State has done a lot of work in that space. And I think too, digital engagement offers us some opportunities that maybe we had not traditionally had. I know when I was at Ohio State, which wasn't that long ago, but we were still in the mindset that we were engaging in person almost all of the time. The email and some email newsletters and things like that. But it was, you had to get on a plane and get on the road, and have these events in order to have kind of a national presence. And I don't think that's really true anymore. So, I think universities that are thinking a lot about how to complement, at a certain level, the in-person, I think, is still really, really important, particularly to the overall experience and to building trust with donors. But gosh, there's so much that can be gained through lots and lots of different methods of digital engagement, which we talk about all the time.
Of course. I mean, look, at last check, there were roughly 580,000 Ohio State alumni. You've worked at other large institutions and do currently. It's hard to get to those folks
Yep.
one at a time having coffees. And we'll certainly talk more about that. So you move on from Ohio State, join the University of Cincinnati, which I'm putting myself in their shoes, and I'm thinking I want to bring some of that experience and expertise to bear here at the foundation as we continue to advance our work. Plenty of Bearcat affinity, then and now, but certainly a different, it's a different institution, different focus, and would love to know kind of what you walked into there and what you were most proud of having accomplished when you moved on.
Yeah, so I think I came to Cincinnati at a time where they were really they had experienced a level of growth prior to my arrival there. So the Proudly Cincinnati campaign was really transformational for them, really put them on a whole different level in terms of fundraising. And that had kind of been able to be sustained for a number of years. And I think then they were looking and starting to plan for the next campaign. And so wanting to make that next jump up in terms of, fundraising activity and engagement and all of that. So it was a time of transition, and I really like that. I like coming in and being able to build new things. And in that respect, I started at Cincinnati as leading their prospect development team. And I think there was really, my early work there focused on building just some fundamental infrastructure, in terms of prospect management policy and documentation. They had recently transitioned over to a new CRM system. So really, which is the same one that Ohio State used. And so I was able to bring some of the cool, customizations and functionality that we were able to build at Ohio State and apply it at Cincinnati as well. So there was just a lot of, I think, just infrastructure building that I would say there in terms of prospect development. What a fantastic team. First, I'll say about the University of Cincinnati, so much, I think, pride in the institution for the team that works there and doing some really incredible work. And coming from Ohio State, right? Like, it seemed like a much smaller organization, but boy, you get into learn a little bit more about what they're doing, and it is really transformational and a terrific institution. About a couple years into my tenure there, I had an opportunity to step into campaign leadership for them, and that was it was new for me. Like I had been in prospect development for a long time, really had kind of an affinity and love of that kind of work. And so going into campaign really made me think differently and flex some different kinds of muscles. I'll say it was just a tremendous learning experience for me. And we had a global pandemic that started 6 months after we launched the campaign publicly. So that was also a good learning experience to try to navigate that as an institution.
What should every director of prospect management or prospect development better understand about the role of a campaign director and vice versa?
I think it's that, and I think that, most people in prospect development probably eventually come to learn about this and come to understand this, which is like the data doesn't tell you the whole story, and context is so important, right? And I think in a few things that I think being in campaign made me think about differently is one, understanding at a deeper level the institutional priorities. Like I think in prospect development, you're kind of brought up to be thinking on a prospect level. You're thinking about an individual prospects interest, and you're really taking that kind of view. I think understanding how universities work, understanding how priorities get set, the kind of the politics and relationships between boards and university leadership and deans and colleges, and how all of that stuff kind of intersects with each other is so important to the context of a campaign and an institution's ability to be successful in their fundraising. And I think sometimes on the operational side of advancement, we don't always get engaged in that kind of awareness about a university and how it operates. So that was interesting to think about. I think the other thing too is what makes an idea fundable, and understanding that really successful philanthropy, at least I think, does a really good job of blending the donor's interest with the university's capacity. Right. And so I think in prospect development, you have such a donor focus that you don't always necessarily think about the university perspective on that as well. And our ability, if we raise this kind of big gift, are we going to be able to deliver on it? And how do you go through kind of the institutional capacity building to make sure you can fulfill that donor's intent and that it's in line with what you need to be doing as an organization or as a university.
Love that. You got pretty plugged into the prospect development community. Who are some of your friends in that space, or conferences or groups that you've been a part of as you've both grown and built your networks?
I think APRA is such a wonderful organization. And one of the great things about the prospect development community, I think, is that it really does feel like a community. It's not just a whole bunch of people who are kind of doing the same thing. Like, we share information with each other. Conferences are such a wonderful time to like see people and be together. There's great idea sharing. And I think this is probably true across most of advancement, but in prospect development, just really what a strong and great community. Most of my professional activity association wise was with APRA. So many wonderful people who were leaders in that organization who I learned so much from, and we were able to take some great ideas and incorporate them back at Ohio State. I will say, as institutional, like so many wonderful people, but I'm going to give a shout out to the University of Michigan, like amazingly, because I'm a Buckeye. Their prospect development operation and Craig Leonard and the work that he did there, like I learned so much from them. They took the initiative like several years ago to start a prospect development forum called the Great Lakes Prospect Development Forum. And it was a little bit more focused than the Big Ten. It was really kind of the Great Lakes schools, but a lot of Big Ten schools were a part of it. And it was, they hosted it every year when I was there. And it was just such an amazing opportunity to get together and really talk shop with people who were living the same life that you were, exchange ideas. It was easy travel because we were all, it was regional travel, nothing too hard to get to. It was not an expensive, conference like some of the international conferences can be or national conferences can be. So they were such a tremendous team, I think, at the University of Michigan, and always just really respected and enjoyed working with them.
Got it. Love it. Becky, you're Midwest through and through.
I know.
Midwest, you're talking Great Lakes. You write an encyclopedia about the Midwest, and then you move to Florida. That's a big move. Tell me about it.
It is. And let me just say, Florida is phenomenal. Like, I love it here. And I was a little bit worried about the heat, but love that too. So this was something that actually it was during COVID that we were able to travel as a family to Florida a little bit more than we had ever, and ended up in a couple of stints coming down and staying for a few weeks because everybody was remote at that time. And had always thought kind of Florida as a long-term sort of thing. Like once the kids are, grown, retired, all of that, we'll make the way to Florida. But I think that experience during COVID really, at least for me, made me think like, what if we could accelerate that timeline a little bit? And then this position came open at UCF, and And the more I learned about it, the more I was like, yep, this is the place. And I'm the kind of person, I'm not like superstitious or anything like that, but I do believe in kind of the rightness of an opportunity and a moment. And so the minute that I stepped foot on this campus, I knew. I was like, all right, this is the place, this is the right place. And it's not because, it's like the best at everything, but there's just because there's a lot of work, that we're doing here at UCF. It's a young institution, really, really well positioned to take that next step. Tremendous leadership team here that we have, but it's the spirit of this university, I think, that really captured me. And then living in Orlando, I also was like, it just was a place that immediately felt like home. And so I can't say enough good things about living in Florida. Maybe politics aside, the sunshine, the weather, you want to be outside all the time, except for, in the middle of the afternoon in the summer. But it's just beautiful here, and I love it.
But you have been in major kind of foundational building mode. And I will say it was great seeing you and Rod and the team. Got to spend some time with Gina last week. But just seeing you all kind of like roll deep as new members, the Big 12, getting to do some, in-person team building yourselves, getting out of Florida, that had to just be a nice break and a chance to connect, just given really how much change there has been.
Yeah. A lot of change at UCF in the last year, and all really good stuff. But I think as you're welcoming new leaders in as an organization, you hit the nail on the head. There's just change all over the place. Like, we're changing process, we're changing procedure, we're changing technology platforms, we're changing leaders, we're changing, our approach to the work. And so that conference was kind of unexpectedly great in terms of team connection for us. And I think it just reinforced, we were actually talking about this earlier this week. It was a nice opportunity again to get away, but reinforce how much we just fundamentally like each other, and we like working together, and we can find joy like in working together, even when things feel a little bit stressful, or we're busy, or there's a lot to get done and a lot of change to try to navigate. The fact that there's a fundamental underlying just appreciation of each other and what each member of the team is bringing to the table, and just joy to be together. That was something that was, I think, a really special thing about that conference for our team.
So you are in Orlando. Everyone associates Orlando with Disney. There are almost 1,500 UCF alumni who work at Disney. And my understanding is you might be a fan of Disney, and maybe have even been on the very newest cruise ship in the entire cruise line fleet for Disney. And so my question is, what can advancement teams learn from Disney, with it both in your backyard, a deep connection to your UCF community, and your fresh recent cruise experience?
Yep. So what a great question. I'll say that my first, actually, I want to say my first exposure to Disney from an operational perspective really was actually at the University of Cincinnati, because the Disney Institute group came into town, and we were fortunate enough to be involved in some of those learning opportunities. And I will just say, like, the attention that Disney gives to the experience, and I'll just take the ship as an example. And I've been on a lot of cruises and a lot of different cruise ships, and walking onto a Disney cruise ship is unlike anything else, at least that I have experienced so far. Just kind of the attention that is paid to making it unique, and making it feel, I'll say, even as an adult, it made me feel like I was entering like a storybook almost in some cases. And I really liked that, even though I'm grown. And I'll even just say, like, entering the cruise ship, in this particular case, we entered and it was Cinderella's ballroom. And they announced us like we were entering a ballroom, and shocking but pretty funny. But just the expense or the attention, I think, to experience over and over and over again, and to make it seamless, and their dedication to making that such an impactful experience. It cannot be easy, right? You think about all of the things in the background that have to happen, and all of the amazing amount of data and technology, collaboration, team, culture building that they have to do as a company to make all of that work together and to make that experience so wonderful on the customer side. That's a tremendous amount of work. And so what I would say maybe is, above anything else, like, to create that kind of experience on the customer end or on the donor end, from our perspective, it takes work and a lot of dedication to building that culture and that capacity within your organization.
I think one of the advantages they have as well, which unfortunately is a challenge in the advancement sector, is that they can be pretty thoughtful about their target market. I'm sure somebody would be at Disney and say, I will tell you exactly who our cruiser is. It's somebody that is X to Y age with ABC characteristic, and their kids have a median age of this and that, and this many kids. And this is the time in their kids' lives when they're most likely to take a cruise. Like, there's all this data that allows them to be very precise in knowing who might be a terrific fit, and also not wasting their time and energy marketing to people that are just not fits for a Disney cruise. And I think that's one of the big issues in advancement, is we kind of have had, at least historically, this pressure to be all things to all people, and to try to reach everyone and make everyone feel included, which is a nice aspirational mission, but it's A, literally impossible, and B, it means that instead of creating that hyper targeted experience for a very specific segment of our population, we just kind of got to do something a little more watered down and generic for more people. And you all are particularly unique, given that you're either the largest or second largest institution in the country as it relates to graduating classes. And so you've got one of the largest and youngest alumni communities in the world.
Yep. And I think to build on that, if I think about kind of the Disney experience, it would feel to me like they're extraordinarily focused on retention, right? So it's an exceptional customer experience so that you return. And there are a lot of very loyal, I think, Disney customers, patrons, I'm not sure what Disney calls them, that return again and again. And I'm to the point in my relationship with Disney where I'm like, as much as I can experience all things Disney, I love it, because I think every time I go there, one, it's a great experience, and two, you learn something, or at least I do, that I can connect back to my work. And so I think, translating that over to our work in advancement, like you said, Brent, I think it's you can't necessarily be all things to all people. You really have to understand the people you are trying to engage, do so intentionally, give them opportunities to connect in, right? There's some level of attempted engagement, I think, across the board, but provide people opportunities to raise their hand, and once they do that, then make sure that you're delivering kind of really impactful experiences for those donors, or engagers, I would say, even pre-donors, so that they continue to want to engage with you. And I think, I think there's a good question to be had here about what value do we as a university provide to alumni, to donors, to the community, beyond the long-term impact on a relationship level and on an experience level. How do we think about providing value to them, and something that they're going to want to continue to return to time and time again?
So you all read the headlines around U.S. News changing their approach, alumni participation being removed from the calculations. I would think that for an institution like UCF, that might be like, let's get out the champagne and celebrate, or at least a sigh of relief type moment, because, truly the odds were just stacked against you, given the many dynamics of the institution. So is that like a moment of just relief, refocus, recenter, or not necessarily?
Yes, and so yes, in that it takes a little bit of the pressure off, right? Because it was really difficult when you are graduating classes at the size that we are, to keep up, with that. And I think, like many institutions that are very large, like UCF, what you end up having to resort to is some transactional things, or some they're more geared about the act of participating rather than necessarily growing a meaningful relationship. Now, I think UCF has tried to approach that as, once somebody makes that kind of participation gift, then we have to continue to engage them and build that relationship. But it can generate a whole lot of, I would say, activity that feels a little bit more participatory than genuine. And so I think this eases the pressure of that a little bit. And yet I would say alumni engagement remains really important for the long-term success of the institution. Sometimes I think in the alumni participation conversation, non-alumni donors and their importance get a little bit lost in that conversation. At UCF, the community support has been, particularly because we are so young, has been just such a transformational part of our growth as a university. So I think it helps us to think about the donor base and our constituent base, maybe in a different way than necessarily only we're thinking so much about alumni. So I would say it gives us an opportunity to step back for a second, but the notion of we need to grow our donor base and retain our donor base stays. And perhaps though we can think a little bit differently about how we do that.
I don't think it's let's celebrate a decline in donor count. And it's more just, you all are one of the institutions where even if you achieved strong donor count growth, your APR would decline, and it sort of looks like weakness or a failure, when in reality it hides the kind of full story. And so I hope that that does allow for some recalibration into the more kind of genuine forms of engagement that you were describing. So want to be conscious of time. You all are just kind of coming through this big team building mode, and I know that will continue. But when you look forward, you're obviously really passionate about the institution. You love being in Florida. In 5 years, when we catch up at the Big 12 Development Conference, what do you hope you'll be able to say that you all have accomplished? Maybe not ultra specifically, but just what's the after, if you're still kind of living in that before period of this new set of leaders at the institution?
So, great question. One, I think a lot about, like, what will it feel like to work here? And I'm still relatively new here, still really like it feels spectacular to work here. I want that to continue to be true. Our team is going to be growing. We, like many universities over the last couple of years, we have a fair number of vacancies. We're growing the team in some areas, and so we'll have a lot of new people coming on board. So how do we continue to think about our culture and really our connection to each other as a team? I think without that as kind of a fundamental building block of success, then we won't have the same kind of success. So are we operating as a cohesive, aligned, collaborative team? And that's not just in how we kind of feel about working with each other. It's actually functionally how we work with each other, how we develop systems of collaboration and connection, so that all of our various disciplines, within advancement and partnerships, are rowing in the same direction. And going towards the same goals. And Rod is doing a lot of work, and I think collectively we're doing a lot of work to build that kind of culture here. So that would be one thing that I would say. I think that gets reflected in our fundraising success. And I think that this institution has a strategic plan and a mission to unleash the potential of people and ideas to positively change the world. We have university leadership that are really committed to this strategic plan. that's got some really meaningful metrics in it around student success, around our community engagement. The direction of the university is phenomenal, and stellar. So I think the next step to that is really identifying and building a cohesive vision for how philanthropy will fuel that. Not just that we need philanthropy to fuel that, but here's how it can, and really identifying the most transformational areas where philanthropy can move us forward. UCF has a really incredibly passionate alumni base and donor community. I think they're ready to help us get to that level. But I think the other thing that we have to think about, and one of the teams that I work with here is our donor relations team. And so I think a lot also about in 5 years, not just what it feels like from an internal culture to work here, but what it feels like to give here. What do our donors feel about this university? And if we can say that they feel passionate and connected and they understand their impact, then I will feel that we did a good job and we were successful in that. So, and again, it gets reflected in the growth of our fundraising operation as well.
Yeah, I don't know that giving is ever quite as much fun as, walking onto a Disney cruise with your family, but it could be a lot more fun and a lot more rewarding than maybe it is right now, or at least that it is for certain segments of the population right now. And so obviously we're spending a ton of time thinking, how do we get a lot closer to that Disney-like experience for a lot more of our donors who today might be getting a receipt.
Yep.
And so there's a ton of potential, without a doubt. I know you're pursuing that aggressively. So let's just close with the Big 12 Development Conference, where we started. Everything you just shared about what you hope you can say you accomplished, what it's like to work there, what is the donor experience, realistically doesn't have that much to do with an athletic conference, but athletics can be a huge source of affinity and attention and passion, or frustration and anger, or annoyance, or whatever it may be. So how much does joining the Big 12 matter as it relates to what you hope to be able to achieve in the coming years?
I think it's, I've used the word transformation a few times in this conversation, but I do think it's a transformational opportunity for UCF, in that it maybe puts us on a national stage in a way that we haven't necessarily been before. I think, and I've heard, a lot of athletics fundraisers talk about athletics as kind of the front door of the university. And I think that's true in a lot of ways. Universities are more than their athletics programs, but what a phenomenal way to really engage people, and particularly keep a fan base engaged outside of your home city or your home state. So it's important for UCF in athletics for sure. But as you said, I think it makes a lot, it's going to have a tremendous effect across all parts of the university. And then I think about just, us from an advancement lens, being able to go to this conference and have a group of high energy people that we can share ideas with, that we can share best practices with. Even that kind of opportunity, I don't think has really been here. We have some collaboration with other universities in the state of Florida, but it helps us broaden our horizons, I think, in so many different ways that we're just pumped about it. But that exposure on a national level, I think, and being able to tell our story, share our impact more broadly, and having the space or the stage, I would say, to do that on, that's really exciting.
Becky, are you hiring?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah, we're hiring lots of positions in my area in particular, some technology positions. We're going to be really growing our donor relations team here. And then certainly thinking about, as we move into campaign, our fundraisers, our frontline team as well. So I'll say as many positive things as I can about UCF. It's just, it's a university with an incredible spirit. We've got an incredible president of our university. We have a tremendous leader in Rod Grabowski. And, you know, I think what we're building here is a really special team that's going to do some really special work.
Well, it was clear that that sentiment is shared not only by you, but by your team. It was fun to see you all, like I said last week, great energy, tons of growth potential, sky's the limit kind of opportunity. There aren't that many institutions where there's just the combination of like scale and youth, where there's just so much building that needs to be done.
Yeah. One of the fun things about UCF is we don't have a whole lot of like, well, we've always done it this way. So we get in, you know, that's one of the benefits of change too, is you get an opportunity to really step back and take a fresh look at everything that you're doing. And so if you're an innovator, a builder, a creative thinker, and you want a space to be able to do that, UCF is the place.
Well, thank you so much, Becky, for sharing your perspective today. Again, fun catching up as always. Really appreciate the commitment you all have to elevating the donor experience there at UCF, and pleased to continue to get your feedback. I didn't even get to share that, you know, we've been doing some kind of AI pilot work, and it was fun to give Becky a little sneak peek of that last week. And I will just say that her reaction was not safe for work, so we're not going to repeat it.
No, you are doing, I'm very excited to be working with you, Brent, and with Evertrue. And really excited about where we're going with stuff.
Keep pushing us. We really need it. We appreciate it. Wish you the absolute best, Becky. Know we'll be in touch soon. Would encourage everybody, reach out to Becky, whether it's around campaign leadership, whether it's around prospect management, or just adding to your network in the sector. Shoot her a note on LinkedIn. Let her know that you heard her on the Raise podcast. And with that, I will sign off and just say thank you to today's guest, Becky Fullmer, who serves as an Associate Vice President for Advancement Operations at the University of Central Florida. Thank you, Becky.
Thanks, Brent.